People laughed at me when I said that Eli Lilly was likely to release Zepbound in single-dose vials, and they sent me inboxes of creators that were openly mocking this idea as something that was even a remote possibility. And ultimately, I got a phone call from the CEO of Eli Lilly himself. And of course, the rest is history. We got the Zepbound single-dose vials. We've actually got multi-dose vials coming. If you missed that article this past weekend, you can screenshot this QR code here and then tap it in your camera roll. It'll take you to our Substack where you can sign up for email alerts. But I'm hearing the same reaction about a Substack article that we put out this past weekend about over-the-counter GLP-1s. And when the same voices start to dismiss the idea again, that tells me everything that I need to know. And we're going to get into all of it on this week's episode of On the Pen, the Weekly Dose. Let's get started.
Welcome to the On the Pen podcast with your host, Dave Knapp.
Welcome back to On the Pen, the Weekly Dose podcast. I'm your host, Dave Knapp, ManOnMounjaro. That's why I'm here. You are on the pen with Wegovy, Saxenda, Victoza, Trulicity, Mounjaro, Zepbound, Compound that pen. And if obesity medicine news is something that is valuable to you on your journey, you're going to want to make sure that you train the algorithm. That's Al Gore in the sky, controlling all the computers, making sure that all the computers get all the content that each computer needs. And you can train him, but you got to do a couple things. You got to hit the thumbs up. You've got to hit the subscribe. And if you're listening on the podcast, you got to give it a 5-star rating and review. That trains little Al Gore, and then he does your bidding and serves you up the content that you want. So let's get into it this week, because this is huge. And if you love speculation, but speculation that's rooted in 3.5 years of following this obesity medicine space obsessively, you're going to absolutely love this episode. Now, I didn't pull this prediction out of thin air. It's pattern recognition over the last, like I said, 3.5 years of following this industry. And once you sort of start to understand and see what happens before these types of decisions get made, this will stop sounding radical real quickly once I lay everything out for you. So this conversation that we're going to have today is not about whether or not GLP-1s should be over the counter. And I believe that, as I'll lay out in the context that I will lay out, I believe they should be. But it's about whether regulators and manufacturers are already laying the groundwork for this to happen. And the answer depends on whether you look at these signals in isolation. So if you're looking at everything by itself, it might not mean a whole lot. But when you put the pieces of the puzzle together, it starts to make sense. And we're going to look at all of those pieces and put them together on today's show. But as always, I want to thank our sponsor, Shed, who brings us this podcast each and every week. If you're looking for treatment for your obesity, look no further than Shed. No matter what your situation is, Shed has a solution for you. They're going to connect you with a doctor. They're going to connect you with a coach. And ultimately, if medically necessary, they may connect you with a medication. They have compounded medications for people who want to go that route and perhaps need something that's not commercially available. Or they have the branded medications too for the cash pay market. There's a little something for everyone at tryshed.com. Use code OTP25 to save 25%. And I hope that you will. Thank you to Shed for providing this podcast each and every week. But here's what happened this past week, and here's why my ears completely perked up. The FDA commissioner, his name's Dr. Marty Makary, and you may remember that Dr. Makary was the chief medical officer for a telehealth company called Sesame. If you've never heard of Sesame, we actually interviewed their CEO at Health Week back in Vegas a couple of months ago. So if you missed that podcast, you can scroll back through. We had a lot of telehealth CEOs. It was a great episode. And so I hope you'll go back and check that out. But Dr. Makary runs the FDA. He's the FDA commissioner now. And he outlined a renewed push to move certain drugs to over-the-counter status. Because I loved what he said, because the shelves and the pricing on the shelves are a huge disinfectant for the cost. He called it the sunlight of pricing clarity brings competition, and it brings honesty to the price of prescription drugs. So moving drugs over the counter could help to bring down the cost of drugs. And he wasn't vague about it. He wasn't being philosophical. He was being practical about what they're looking at the FDA. And I want to lay out what his criteria were and tell you how this all kind of fits together. So there's no abuse potential for these drugs that they're looking at. They're generally safe for self-use, and there's no need for routine laboratory testing or clinical monitoring. Then he said something that matters more than people realize, because he said that prescription status often drives refill churn, emergency room visits, and billing events that protect the system, but don't necessarily protect patient safety or better outcomes. Did you know that there are people with care deserts or lack of coverage that literally utilize the emergency room for prescription refills? That's the state that we're in. And so this would be a shift to help remove that burden, among other things. So this isn't reform language. This is actually a redefinition of what deserves to be gated behind a prescription wall. And the timing here is particularly interesting because the timing of Dr. Makari's statements didn't happen in a vacuum. Just a few weeks ago, they came together in the White House, Lilly, Novo, and the administration, and announced most favored nation pricing agreements with Lilly and Novo. This was back in the fall. And there were cash pay initiatives that were launched, the lowering of cash pay Wegovy, the upcoming orforglipron, Zepbound, and the injectable Wegovy and Ozempic, along with a new Medicare pilot program that's going to expand access to these drugs to millions of people. And you do not renegotiate something this big at a federal level without also discussing access models and how people get access to these prescription drugs. So we know that these conversations had to be a part of that, and OTC, over-the-counter access, is literally the most powerful pressure release valve in that entire system. Now, if you're saying you're already way off track for me, I can poke a whole bunch of holes into why the FDA would never do this. Consider this. Consider Orlistat. The FDA has already made a weight management drug that was a prescription over the counter. It was about 20 years ago or so. You can fact check me on that. But about 20 years or so, Orlistat, which began as a prescription drug called Xenical, it was dosed at 120 milligrams 3 times a day, and it worked by roughly blocking like 30% of dietary fat absorption. The FDA approved an over-the-counter version of Orlistat at 60 milligrams 3 times a day. So it's the same exact active pharmaceutical ingredient, same drug, half the dose, lower exposure, widely broader access to the medication. And it wasn't accidental. It was deliberate to meet the challenges of weight management in the modern world. Now, Orlistat, before you're like, well, Orlistat's not as powerful of a drug as semaglutide or forglipron, etc. It also wasn't a gentle drug. In fact, the effects were pretty famously known, because those effects, and this is where I start to sound more like a comedy routine or a horrible drug commercial when I say that oily stools, urgent bowel movements, flatulence with discharge, occasional fecal incontinence were all things that people who took Orlistat, even at the 60 milligram, experienced. These were not like rare edge cases. This is like they expected you to have these issues because, again, it was blocking 30% of the fat that you ate, and it had to go somewhere. And that somewhere was often, unfortunately and untimely, in somebody's pants. And the FDA still approved over-the-counter access for Orlistat. Why? Because the risks were predictable, they were self-limiting, they were immediately noticeable, and they did not require lab monitoring or physician supervision to manage. So that's the bar for Orlistat. Now compare that to these early GLP-1 pills, specifically Wegovy, because that's what we have on the market currently. Low-dose oral GLP-1 side effects typically include, and again, I'm talking low dose, starter dose. They typically include mild nausea, early satiety, transient gastrointestinal discomfort. So again, We're looking at the early starter doses because what they did with Orlistat, if that's the blueprint, was half of the pharmaceutical drug, most effective dose. No incontinence, no socially disruptive side effects, no abuse potential, no intoxication risk, no routine labs required. This is all starter doses of oral GLP-1s. So from a regulatory perspective, early oral GLP-1s fit comfortably inside the risk envelope that the FDA has already put out there with Orlistat. Now, again, none of this stuff is happening in a vacuum, but these are pieces of the puzzle that are all happening simultaneously that I think we have to put together. At the Economic Club of Washington, D.C. in December, so we talked about most favored nations, those negotiations, likely OTC was discussed at some point in those conversations. We talked about Orlistat and how that was a precedent-setting thing. We talked about how Macari is moving to definitely move certain prescription drugs to over-the-counter. Listen to this, because back at the Economic Club of Washington, D.C., Lilly CEO Dave Ricks was asked, why aren't these drugs just over-the-counter? The problem's that big. They seem safe. And he didn't dismiss the idea out of hand. In fact, what he said was interesting in light of the conversation that we're having today. He said, Lilly's oral GLP-1 would be a strong candidate for that kind of pharmacy setting over time, pending additional safety data, including pregnancy data, that Lilly would be interested in expanding access and lowering price for over-the-counter GLP-1s. That was not a casual response by Dave Ricks. That was strategic positioning of orforglipron as a future franchise of medicine that could be over-the-counter. So I want to zoom out again because I want to be very clear. We're not talking full strength, full therapeutic doses on day one over the counter. Just like Orlistat, the key framework would be early strengths only with clear BMI selections, explicit exclusions for folks who are pregnant, strong labeling with stop signs of warnings, and then physician involvement required for dose escalation up to those higher therapeutic doses. So this is not talking full deregulation free-for-all on GLP-1s. It's staging early access to the medication and to treatment for obesity. One other thing happened recently that I think is also something that could potentially be playing into this. So last week, the FDA asked the manufacturers of the popular GLP-1 medications, Lilly and Novo, to remove suicidality warnings from GLP-1 obesity labels. And that, I believe, again, the timing, you have to look at the timing of all of this stuff happening at once. It reframes the drug class as better understood, more predictable, and this is the most important part, less concerning at a population level. Meaning, what if everyone's on this the same way everyone's on a NSAID or acetaminophen? What are the consequences? It's less concerning at a population level when there are no suicidality mental health warnings on these medications. Now, that's a separate topic. We sort of litigated that a little bit last week. But regulators do not soften that kind of language on a drug class if they intend to keep it tightly gated by prescribers forever. They would never soften that language. Is this starting to make sense to anyone? So here's why I think the pills come first. Injection-based GLP-1s, while they're more powerful, they're just that. They're more powerful. They require more education to inject. They require technique. They require titration oversight. And the pill, not to mention refrigeration, right? They require refrigeration. The pills remove all of that friction. And that's why oral GLP-1s are the logical first step towards broadening access via over-the-counter access. So not injections, not the pens, the pills. And we heard from the CEO of Novo Nordisk just this past week with the launch of oral Wegovy. They're adjusting their forecast, expecting that orals may make up 30% of the entire obesity market. You don't do that without expanding access in a massive way. Could OTC be one of those ways? So let's put all of these things together. FDA leadership is redefining what necessitates a prescription drug. We've got federal pricing negotiations that have taken place in the last 6 months that likely discuss this very thing. We have manufacturing openly discussing access expansion through specifically over-the-counter models potentially. We have risk language from the FDA being massively softened, and we have oral early strength formulations that fit the model that's already been out there in Orlistat pretty darn well, minus the unfortunate sharding incidences. And I don't think that any of this is accidental. I think this is masterful regulatory and business planning choreography, all working together, playing out in real time. I just think that we, specifically us at OnThePen, are starting to see the writing on the wall here. So I want to take a pause and I want to tell you a couple things. First of all, I want to hear from you right now in the comments. What do you think about over-the-counter GLP-1s as I have described it? Not just a free-for-all on all forms, all doses, all strengths, but as I've described it, early dose GLP-1 pills over the counter. What are your thoughts? Put it in the comments below. Second of all, we heard another massive story from Eli Lilly this week that they are releasing multi-dose vials for Zepbound and Mounjaro. In fact, that was approved by the FDA, and that was an exclusive story covered by OnThePen. If that's the type of story that you think would be helpful to know or useful, or just you'd appreciate knowing that, I want you to screenshot this video on your phone right now and save it to your camera roll. And then this QR code right here, just tap it, and it's going to open you up to our newsletter where you can sign up and get those newsletters directly to your inbox. So that's the homework that you have right now while we're pausing. Screenshot, save the video to your camera roll, and then tap the QR code from your camera roll, and it will open up our website where you can sign up for our newsletter so you never have to miss a story. Everything we talked about today came out as articles over the last couple of days that you would already have before we sat down and recorded this video. And so I hope that you'll sign up there. We are a bestseller on Substack, and you have helped us get there. So if you're missing out, it's simply just Substack is just a newsletter. That's all it is. It goes directly to your inbox. Then if you want to click on the email, you can go to actual Substack website and leave a comment, like, subscribe. But if you are missing it, you're missing out, but you don't have to. Screenshot this, save the image to your camera roll, and then go to your camera roll, tap that QR code, and it'll take you to obesity.news where you can sign up for access to our newsletters. So even if low dose GLP-1s do move to over the counter, I want you to know that I don't think that this is something that's going to happen immediately. I think that this is groundwork that's being laid for this to happen. And if you've watched this space long enough, you usually know what comes next. The people that are laughing about this today are the ones that are asking how they could have missed this later, or pretending like they didn't is probably more accurate. But if it does happen in the near term, access expands, pricing of these shifts, because again, clear, transparent pricing is the best disinfectant for the cost of these being so high. I mean, let's just think about this. The fact that Lilly and Novo can offer these for a couple $100s a month, it tells us everything we need to know about the insurance middlemen in our country, doesn't it? I mean, these a year ago were $1,100 drugs, $1,300 drugs. Guess what happened when they cut out the middleman? Now we're getting injection level results out of a pill starting at $149, 10% of the cost of the original Wegovy. A year later, the middlemen are a big problem in this country. So gatekeeping weakens on these medications. Obesity treatment becomes normalized, I think, is one of the most important things that happens in this shift to over the counter, like it did with Orlistat. And once that door opens, it does not close. and access expands. And I think that this is an extremely exciting time to be following obesity medicine news. Listen, if you found this information helpful, train the little Al Gore in the sky, the algorithm, as they call it, and let the algorithm know that this information is useful and that other people should be seeing it too. Because every day it seems like we're losing an account on one platform or another because the topic is sensitive, obesity, weight loss, and we get caught up in a lot of nonsense here at OnThePen. And my ask of you would be simply to train the algorithm, hit the like, interact, engage, and leave a comment. I'm super curious to know what the community thinks on this topic. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being the best part of what we do at OnThePen. Join us every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, live at 11 a.m. Central for community live streams that we've been doing. I hope to see you there tomorrow, and we'll check you on the next one.